Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for watching and thank you for being here. I hope you're all still staying safe and healthy. I hope you're still shouting from the rooftops everything that makes you angry about this government that is still trying to kill us. The thing that I am most angry about at this moment is the fact that Pemberton got freed, despite the fact that he should still be in jail for killing Jennifer Laude. Hopefully this event does not fade from your memory and you remember that Jennifer's life mattered, trans lives matter, and that people like Pemberton need to stay in jail. So for this episode, we're going to be talking about the things that I got to see in August. Not a whole lot compared to June and July. But yeah, so starting off with TV, let's talk about Stargirl. Stargirl is the new DC Universe show that's Arrowverse adjacent, but now the show is moving to the CW. It's about this high school student, Courtney Whitmore, who discovers that her late father was Starman, a member of the Justice Society of America, and she inherits Starman's signature weapon, the Cosmic Staff. This is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but I think that the foundation of Stargirl is really good. I think it has really good bones, if that means anything. I really like most of the people in the cast, and I think that if this show was just a straightforward family drama, the cast would still be able to carry it on its shoulders. Unfortunately, when the show tries to be a superhero thing, it still doesn't really know what its identity is, what it's trying to be. Everything that it does in terms of the superhero stuff feels underdeveloped, and normally I wouldn't really hold an originality against a show, especially a superhero show, but this is a problem for me with Stargirl because the entire premise of this show is that these younger people are sort of taking up the mantles of these former superheroes and they're becoming new versions of the heroes. But that's not reflected in the series at all. I still feel like the writing is pretty much your standard superhero / coming of age thing, but just not done as well as everything else. Also, tonally speaking, I still feel like Stargirl has a lot of fine-tuning to go through because the high school stuff, the family drama stuff is still a little like teeny boppery. It's still very light and fluffy, and then suddenly they just jump over to supervillains like murdering children. So the show still hasn't really figured out a way for those two things to coexist. However, there still are good things about Stargirl. The most unique thing about the show is the action. I really love the fact that the action has its own sort of signature style to it. There's a lot of in-camera stunts, lots of long shots, and lots of wire work. You can tell that a lot of these stunts are being done by people in harnesses, but the fact that it's obvious isn't a bad thing. In fact, I love the fact that it sort of leans into the wire work and you can tell. It gives the fighting like this sort of floaty quality and feels a little artificial, but again, it just separates it from all the other superhero shows out there. And I'm really hoping that the show moving forward will commit to, being weirder, having more originality as well. Next up is a TV movie that was available in the United States like a few months back, but it was only made available in the Philippines in August, and that is Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Kimmy versus the Reverend. It serves as sort of like an epilogue to the main Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt series. And in this special, Kimmy finally gets her closure with the man who put her in that underground bunker all those years ago. I can't think of a better comedy series to put into like the interactive film format that Netflix has than Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Those who have seen the show will know that the humor is completely surreal. The show has absolutely no sense of realism to it whatsoever, and that's a good thing. And that kind of humor really fits the interactive format because they really get away with so much stuff in this like sort of 80 to 90 minute special. Even just the way some of the choices that you have to make are phrased on screen is really funny. And I like the fact that the filmmakers have anticipated the waiting times when it comes to making a decision. Because if you've ever played like an interactive thing on Netflix, you'll know that after you make a decision, you still have to wait for the decision timer to run out. And so what the filmmakers have done here is that even as you're waiting, there's funny stuff happening on screen. Sometimes those jokes are funnier than anything else in this special. And even if you make a decision that leads to a dead end, the sort of dead end screen that you get is still also very funny. Unfortunately, the longer you play Kimmy versus the Reverend, the more that you notice the limitations of the Netflix interactive film format. Just like Bandersnatch, this film is like very clearly trying to push you towards the quote-unquote right choices, which is disappointing. It's not like, a choose your own adventure book where you get a really completely different ending depending on the choices you make. Here, the film is really just trying to funnel you toward the correct answer. And while I do like Kimmy's little arc in this special, I think it's a better ending than the one we actually got in the actual series. The other characters don't really have a whole lot of development to them. The character played by Daniel Radcliffe is really bland, unfortunately. However, the thing that really saves this special is the fact that the cast is still so good. I know that Titus Burgess sort of has overtaken Ellie Kemper as the star of Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, but I really do think Ellie Kemper is fantastic in this role, and she gets to stretch her dramatic muscles as well in this special. John Hamm is fantastic. This is the most he's been able to do as the Reverend, and he really just leans into that character. And Carol Kane is great as well. She gets to play Lillian in a few different ways. So yeah, if you're a fan of Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt at all, I would highly recommend checking out the special. It's only gonna take you like 90 minutes max. Another special to a beloved comedy that I got to see in August was a Parks and Recreation special. Now, I only really got into Parks and Rec very recently, and I watched the whole series for the first time in like a week. And I just really love these characters, and getting to see them again, even if I haven't been in love with them as long as most fans were, was really, really great. The Parks and Rec special is a remotely produced episode that was done for charity during this COVID time, but in my opinion, this is the only remotely produced TV episode that I've seen that actually really works and makes sense given the characters and the plot. It's edited really well, the sound mixing is great, and most importantly, the characters and the acting is still as good as it was in Parks and Rec. I am 99% sure that these actors didn't actually, do their lines in front of each other, but still somehow they still appear to have chemistry, which is crazy. And this special actually made me more emotional than the actual finale of Parks and Recreation. Although I wouldn't say that this is a better ending, it still made me want to cry more than the actual ending did. And while it's pretty clear that this episode is really being done for charity, and it's really just to remind people of certain things to do during this whole coronavirus situation, it still really makes sense given the characters, like I said. And what I love is that all these COVID reminders come off very organically for who all these characters are. And this episode remembers to anchor itself onto the character of Leslie Knope, who, if you don't know, is a character who just loves to help people, but at the expense of her own comfort and her own health sometimes. And it's great that this episode really reminds us that as much as we want to help other people, we have to take care of ourselves as well. And I thought that was great. So yeah, again, if you are a Parks and Rec fan and you have not yet seen this reunion special, I would highly recommend checking it out. Now, in terms of movies, unfortunately not a great month August was for movies. The first thing I got to see was Peninsula, which is the sort of spiritual sequel to Train to Busan. I was highly disappointed with this. It's not good. I really, really don't like this movie. Peninsula focuses on this military guy who's sort of sent back into Ground Zero as a mercenary, and of course he, encounters zombies and survivors and whatnot. Now, everybody who saw Train to Busan, at least most people I know, including myself, loved that movie because of the fact that it felt like this low-budget zombie movie about ordinary people just trying to fight off the undead, and the characters were so strong, it had a lot of heart. But all of that is gone in Peninsula. Peninsula is essentially Fast and Furious with a little bit of zombies. And I'm not against the idea of a horror movie sort of going the more action route in the sequel. I mean, if you look at Alien versus Aliens, I actually think I prefer Aliens, marginally speaking. But here, Peninsula, they really just have not... They didn't keep any of the stuff that made Train to Busan so good. It's also a really ugly movie. There's so much CGI in this that does not look good at all. And if you're watching this just for the action, I regret to inform you that the action is not good as well. Every single action scene and set piece is just so poorly handled. There are a few car chases here that just go on for forever, and there's no sense of geography, there's no sense of momentum or suspense. You don't feel any sort of danger for these characters, unlike in Train to Busan. Speaking of those characters, they're pretty terrible here. The main military guy is a complete blank slate of a character who has an automatic rifle, so you're not worried about him at all. The other characters are unrealistically adept at surviving a zombie apocalypse. And it's disappointing because at the beginning of Peninsula, they tried to cook up some interesting dynamics between these survivors who are taking refuge in Hong Kong and the people in Hong Kong who are treating them like these mercenaries that they can just order around. but then the movie doesn't really do anything with that dynamic, and it just turns into Fast and Furious, like I said. So yeah, it's a pretty pointless story. I wouldn't recommend it. If you're looking for a follow-up to Train to Busan, I would recommend the animated prequel Seoul Station. Although that's not great as well, I still think it's a lot better than this. Next up, I have Project Power, which is that new Netflix superhero movie about these drugs that can give you a different superpower depending on your genetic makeup. Really not much to say about it. It's a very, very okay, mediocre kind of action movie. The biggest issue I have with Project Power is the fact that the script just feels really underdeveloped. It feels like a script for a TV pilot and a season finale sort of crammed into one. In fact, the whole movie just sort of feels like a demo reel for this idea that these filmmakers had. It sort of toys with the premise of like drug addiction and drugs being distributed in like inner cities and whatnot, but then it doesn't really do anything with those ideas. However, it is still a totally fun time that you're probably not gonna remember after you watch it. There is some creative stuff in it. I really like the depiction of the superpowers because each superpower sort of draws on the abilities that an animal has. But the way that the people gain these superpowers is done through like very body horror style transformations. And the three main actors are very, very good. It's great to see Jamie Foxx doing something a little darker. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is in like full action hero mode. But the standout is easily Dominique Fishback, who some of you might know from HBO's The Deuce if you've ever seen that show. But she was great in that show and she's great in this. And she can also rap really well, which is surprising. So yeah, it's a perfectly enjoyable movie that you'll probably forget after you see it. However, the main film that I wanted to talk about, the thing that really stood out to me in August, is the documentary Boys State, directed by Jesse Moss and Amanda McBain. A couple of videos ago, I mentioned that the documentary On the Record was my favorite documentary of the year. That has quickly changed. It is now easily Boys State. This is one of the most entertaining and satisfying and emotional documentaries that I've seen in a long time. Boys State is about this real summer camp that's been happening in the US since like the 30s or something. There's a boys' state and a girls' state. This documentary only really focuses on the boys' state camp. And what happens in these camps is that they take like 1,000 high school age boys and split them into two hypothetical political parties. And by the end of the camp, what these parties have to do is to choose a representative and then try to get them elected as governor. So the whole camp is really just to teach the mechanics of like electoral politics and whatnot. But then of course it gets interesting, it gets dirty. When you think about it, Boys State is really just reality TV. But the thing that separates this documentary from just reality TV is the direction. The way this is filmed, it's done like a thriller. Just from the way that the shots are chosen and angled and lit. You really feel like you're in there with them. It feels more like a House of Cards kind of thing rather than reality TV. And as you continue watching the documentary, this quest to sort of elect a governor goes from like a fun summer camp activity to something with enormous significance. And you feel just the weight of everything. There's so much suspense. And the climax of this movie is like watching a sports film. Like everything is on the line, you are biting your nails down to the bone. It's incredible stuff. I think that this movie does a really good job of giving equal weight to both sides of the divide. But I also do think that the movie clearly takes a stand, which I think is pretty valuable in this regard, because there are some candidates who stand for something more honest and other candidates who stand for something else that is not that great. And I think the film definitely knows where its heart is, but it doesn't try to demonize the other side at all. And even beyond that stuff, this documentary is still really funny and it's incredibly emotional. By the end of this, it's one of my favorite endings of the year. I was trying to stop myself from crying, which is a weird thing to say about a documentary about like hypothetical high school government. One of the coolest things that Boys State offers is the fact that it has these incredibly well-rounded three-dimensional characters, really. They have like 4 main boys that they focus on, and each of them is really, really different. On one party, you have Steven and Renee, who are legitimately inspiring figures. Like, if these kids ever enter politics, they're the kind of people that our nation sort of needs leading it. And then on the other side, you have Ben, who is this terrifying guy who just really understands how to play dirty, but you can also sort of understand where he's coming from in a really crazy way. So that, to me, makes him a really interesting character. And then you have Robert, who sort of becomes the comic relief because he's made out to be not the brightest bulb of the bunch, but he's also weirdly sincere, so it leads to a lot of funny moments. The thing is with these characters is that they don't necessarily tell us anything that we don't already know about US electoral politics, but it's great to sort of see their journey. You want them to choose different decisions and whatnot, but you can also see just how they've been indoctrinated, some of them to believe certain things. You can see how some of them are really trying to break out of that indoctrination. It's a really interesting process that they're all going through. In the end, I love Boys State so much because I just felt like it offered me so much more than I was expecting. You know, I was expecting just a documentary, whatever that makes you think of, but instead it gave me like this indictment of US electoral politics. It also gave me a very multifaceted portrait of America from the point of view of these young boys who all come from different backgrounds. One of them is black, one of them is Latino, one of them has a disability, one of them is a total WASP. And while the experiment of Boys State may be hypothetical, I think the documentary clearly shows what needs to change about US politics, just for the sake of these kids. Because sometimes when you hear what some of these kids seem to really believe in their hearts, it is terrifying, it's chilling. The fact that they have such strong opinions about things that they shouldn't really have opinions on, like, you know, reproductive health. It's crazy. But again, I like the fact that the documentary isn't just demonizing all these kids. Definitely not. Like, you can tell where they're coming from, you can tell how they've arrived at certain decisions, and it's still heartbreaking and emotional any way you slice it. So yeah, if you ever get a chance to see Boys State, I would highly recommend it. It's so satisfying to watch, and I'm gonna remember it by the end of this decade for sure. Alright, so those are my thoughts on everything that I saw in August. Thank you again, guys, for watching, and thank you for being here. I hope you still continue staying safe and staying healthy. And again, if you'd like to say anything about anything that I talked about in this video, please do leave me a comment and let's have a conversation.